This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Rabbi Sai,
Gimel Dalet, and what Parsha?
we're learning about Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar's second dream. In his second dream, he sees a tree that's very tall, that's very wide, that produces fruits, and under its branches lived the wild animals and all of mankind and the birds of the heavens who are gaining sustenance from this tree. However, at a certain point, an angel comes down from heaven and declares, cut down the tree, remove the branches, throw off the fruits, and this tree metamorphosizes into a madman, into someone who grows hair like an eagle, nails like a bird, and he no longer is interested in human company. He bathes by the dew of the heavens. He eats from the herbage of the field. Obviously, the meaning of the dream was this represented Nebuchadnezzar, who after his tree grew to the heights of the heavens and he ruled over the entire world. Nebuchadnezzar was Malach B'Kippah, and he provided sustenance for the whole world. But nevertheless, eventually, he lost his sanity. He became a madman, to the point where he looked like an animal. He grew long nails, he grew long hair, he preferred to bathe in the dew, he preferred to eat the herbage of the field. And Daniel interprets the dream, and as we learned last week, Daniel sticks in his 2 cents. Let's take a look again at Pasuk Chaf Daled. Lahain Malka. What does the word Lahain mean? In truth, king. Milki Yishbar Alach. My advice should be proper to you. Yishbar is a lashon of Shapir. Proper. Vachatayach, and your error, bitstaka peruk. Redeem with charity. Va'avayasach, and your sin, b'michanani, and by being gracious to the poor. Hein teheve archa l'shalvesucha. This will give length to your tranquility. So Rashi is bothered by a question over here. Ma'ra Daniel lahasi itzatav l'Nebuchadnezzar. Why is Daniel giving Nebuchadnezzar this good advice? Who asked Daniel? Nebuchadnezzar asked him to interpret the dream. So Daniel said, the tree is you. You're going to have a big Yerida. Who asked him to stick in his 2 cents? Like Yosef. Okay, if you remember by Yosef, the Sefer Be'er Yosef explains that actually Yosef gave Paroi the advice because that was actually part of the interpretation of the dream. There was something Yosef saw in the fact that Paroi woke up in middle and then had the dream again. That meant to Yosef that Paro was going to do something about it, and he interpreted the waking up as Paro's storing up food and providing food. And the Malbim, interestingly, says a similar approach over here. And that is, Daniel is not sticking in his 2 cents, but rather Daniel is interpreting the dream. And that is, if you remember in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, it said that from this tree, there was food for everyone. And all of mankind would be sustained from that tree. That was in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. That all of mankind would be sustained from the tree. However, when Daniel interpreted the dream, he left out the words Umina Yitzin Kol B'nei Anasha. He left out those words. He left out the words Uminei Yitzin Kol Bisra. He just put in Umazayin L'Chaylabe. Says the Malbim, what happened to those words Uminei Yitzin Kol Bisra? This is where they are. The interpretation of, from this tree, all mankind will have produce. The interpretation is Nebuchadnezzar, give tzedakah to the poor. That's the interpretation of the dream. In other words, this is not just good advice, but it's just interpretation of the dream. Very interesting. That's how the Malbim interprets it. That this is not Daniel's advice, this is merely Daniel's interpretation. Now Rashi asks,
which part of the dream is that?
This is in Pasuk, Tes, correct? It says, the inbe sagi umazayin l'choylabe, there'll be food for everyone. And at the end of the pasuk says, uminei yitzin kol bisra. That was when Nebuchadnezzar had the dream.
Kol bisra doesn't mean the poor.
It means even the poor. I mean, the Ashirim, they already have a lot of basar. Now we're talking about the aniyim who don't have the basar. We got to feed them. So it's very interesting. In Pasuk Yud Ches, when Daniel interprets the dream, he says, "Va'afye shapir ve'in beisagi umazon l'chaylabe." He leaves out the words "uminei yitzim kol bisra." Okay, let us add.
Why does he leave it out?
So that according to the Malbim, he doesn't leave it out. This pasuk in Pasuk Chav Daled is the meaning of "uminei kol yitzim kol bisra." Now says Rashi, "Umara Daniel lahasi etza tovel in Nebuchadnezzar." Why did Daniel see fit to give this good advice to Nebuchadnezzar? Says Rashi, Ra Yisrael Aniyim. He saw the poor Jews, Shefele Goyla, the downtrodden Jews who had been exiled, Machzirin al Psachim, going door to door. V'hisiu Eitza Lechanenam. He gave this advice to have mercy on them. Amar Lai Aniyim Elu Sheglisim Re'ivim Heim. Pirnasim. Daniel said to Nebuchadnezzar, these poor souls, they're starving, support them. And he did, and he supported them for 12 months, and as we will learn, so long as he supported them, the ominous premonition, the ominous effects of the dream did not take place until Nebuchadnezzar stopped supporting the Aniyim. Okay, now I would like to give out a sheet over here about, we spoke this out briefly last week, about what the Gemara in Bava Basra says about Daniel's advice to Nebuchadnezzar. This is a Gemara in Daf Daled in Bava Basra, and it talks about Hordis. We know Hordis murdered the entire family of the Chashmonaim, and to the point where there was a woman who said, "I am the last remaining survivor of the Chashmonaim family, and from now on, if anyone says they're from the Chashmonaim, they're really Eved or a Mamzer, because I'm the last one and I'm about to jump off the roof." And the Gemara says Hordis preserved her in honey, which the Gemara, according to one opinion, says that he actually satisfied his desires with this dead, preserved woman. Imagine such a thing. And anyway, the Gemara says Bava ben Bud, that Hordis went ahead and he murdered all the Chachamim. He killed all the Chachmei Yisrael, except for a blind man named Bava ben Buta, who actually Hordis blinded. The Gemara says he took the pricks of a porcupine and he stuck them into Bava ben Buta's eyes. Okay? And why did he let him survive? He wanted to take advice from him. He knew the Chachamim would give him good advice. And after he wanted to see how loyal Bava ben Buta would be to him, so he snuck into Bava ben Buta's room, thinking Bava ben Buta would have no idea who he was. And he said, "Yeah, what do you think of that Hordis guy? Why don't you give him a curse?" He said, "No, you're not to curse a king." He's not a king. No, we still have to honor him. So Hordis was very taken by the respect that Bava ben Buta had to Hordis, which was him. And he said, "Oy I put out the eyes of the world." Which is what? The Beis HaMikdash. What should I do to rekindle the eyes of the world? To rekindle the fire of the world, the light of the world. So Bava ben Buta gave Hordis the advice to do what? Right? To build the Beis HaMikdash, the second temple. Restore the second Beis HaMikdash. So the Gemara asks, Uvava ben Buta, Heichi Avid Hachi, how could Bava ben Buta give Hordis this advice? V'amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rab, V'itemer Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Mibnei ma nenash Daniel. Why was Daniel punished? Mibnei shehesi eitzel Nebuchadnezzar. Because Daniel gave advice to Nebuchadnezzar. Shenemar, like it says in Sefer Daniel, Perek Daled, Pasuk Chav Daled, Lohein, in truth, Malka, King, Malki Yishbarlach, my advice should be good for you. V'chatoich b'tzedakah proik. And your error, redeem with charity. V'avayasach b'mechananim. And your sin, by being gracious to the poor. Hein tehavi archa l'shavasich. This will lengthen your peace. Uchsiv, and it says in the next pasuk, we didn't read it yet, Kula mata Nebuchadnezzar Malka. It all happened, the whole dream happened to Nebuchadnezzar, but not immediately, because in fact, only at the end of 12 months. So we see Daniel was held accountable for giving this good advice to Nebuchadnezzar to give tzedakah. So what do we learn from here? You're not allowed to advise Goyim to do mitzvahs.
How do you wonder?
Because Daniel was punished for advising Nebuchadnezzar to give tzedakah.
What does it say?
Oh.
How tell you?
The Gemara is going to ask that. We're going to get to that. How do we know Daniel was punished? Right? How do we know Daniel was punished? So you cannot advise Goyim to do good deeds. Don't give them that advice.
How can we convert a Goy if it comes to become a Jew?
We don't. We say get lost.
Well, get lost, that's it.
Yeah. We don't need that. We don't need the Goyim. Chashim gerim liyisrael kisapachas, right? We tell him, go fly a kite.
But the biggest told me that woman were from Goyim. Rabbi Meir,
He didn't want to fly a kite.
Antonio,
He didn't like kite flying.
Rabbi Kiva.
He didn't like the lake we asked him to jump into. Yeah. But we're not interested in gerim.
Radia bar Kanira,
You mean uncles?
Unkelos again.
Yeah. Uncles, yeah. So the Gemara says, Iba Yisema, so you know how Bava and Buta could give advice? Shani Avda de Chayv Mitzvahs. He was advising Hordis. Hordis was an Eved, and Eved is Chayv Mitzvahs. But a guy like Nebuchadnezzar, you can't give advice to. The Iba Yisema, Shani Beis HaMikdash. You could advise a guy to build a Beis HaMikdash. Do you like Malchus? Because if not for the intervention of the government, like Misbini, it would never be built. Says the Gemara, but Daniel minon the Yanish. How do we know Daniel was punished?
How do we know that? Why do we say that if it wasn't that we have to rely on a guy and a Goyish government to build a Mesa Mikdash? Maybe at some point in the future, Bnei Israel would take power again and they would build it. We don't want a guy to become involved in mitzvahs, and we don't want to rely on the Goyim. So we're going to rely on the Goyim to build a Mesa Mikdash? Isn't that an oxymoron?
In the times of the second base, in the times of the temple, when we were under Roman rule, it wouldn't have been possible.
So we shouldn't build it until Bnei Israel.
That was the beginning, but now it was under Roman rule, and this was like about 200 years into the second Beis Hamikdash when Horus came along. First Beis Hamikdash, there was tremendous peace. Shlomo Melech brought in an era of peace, but now, after the Dalet Malchios, it wasn't going to happen. So Gemara says like this: how do we know Daniel was punished? Ilema mishum dechsev vatikra Esther lahasach. If it's because in the Megillah it says Esther called Hasach, and who's Hasach? V'amarav Hasach zeh Daniel. And why is he called Hasach? Hani chalamanda amar shecharchu migdulasai. This only makes sense according to the opinion that he was called Hasach because he was cut off from his greatness, that he lost his job. But if the reason he's called Hasach is because he gave the final go-ahead for any decree of the king, so then how do we know Daniel was punished? The answer is, we'll see later in Sefer Daniel, the Shadjua, L'Goiva de Aryavasa. He was thrown into the lion's den. So either he lost his job, or he was thrown into the lion's den. What did he do wrong? He advised Nebuchadnezzar.
What happened to the name of Belshazzar? He was named of Belshazzar first.
He was what?
Belshazzar.
Yeah, we're going to get to Belshazzar at the beginning of Perek. Then Belshazzar comes to the scene. Yeah. Now let's look at the Rambam. What does the Rambam have to tell us about giving advice to a guy? Va'asur lahasi eitza toiva l'guy. Don't give good advice to a guy. Don't tell him, you should really do this mitzvah, do that mitzvah. Don't give him that good advice. Oila Eved Rasha.
Be a stockbroker to a guy?
Yeah.
Giving him advice?
How about having a goy shit to do business?
Here we're talking about, Rabbi, so we're talking about advising him in spiritual matters. Oila Eved Rasha. Va'afilu lahasiyah eitza sheyaseh dvar mitzvah. Even, this isn't interesting, the concept behind this is, we're talking about a guy who, in the times of the Rambam, was Ovid Avodah Zarah. So you want to advise this Ovid Avodah Zarah to give tzedakah, to do this mitzvah. So what are you doing? You're giving him zchusim. No, don't give this Avarian, this Rasha, zchusim. If you cannot advise him to do a mitzvah, if he's going to be Omed Berishai. V'lei nisnase Daniel was only tested, only because he advised Nebuchadnezzar to give tzedakah. Shenemar lahen malka. In truth, king malki yishbar alach. My advice should be good for you. Now I want to talk about an interesting issue. You're now to advise a guy who's, let's say, who's over on the Zayin mitzvahs b'nei Noach, the advice to give tzedakah. Are goyim chayiv in the mitzvah of tzedakah? Well, no, a guy. Is a guy mechuyev to give tzedakah? So at first glance, we would say,
But doesn't he have an obligation to be a good human being and to worry about other humans.
Where does it say
and
that?
creations of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. So one creation of Kadosh Baruch Hu doesn't have some kind of his chayvus, some kind.
That's what we're asking, does he?
Yeah, I would think so. Because you're a human, you're a higher much bigger than an animal. But you should have some kind of higher standard by which you're judged.
He does have higher standards. Animals are allowed to kill each other, and goyim are not allowed to kill each other, and they're not allowed to steal, and they're not allowed to eat Ever Menachai. But if some guy needs $1, to buy himself a piece of bread, is another guy mechuyev to give him? So at first glance we would say, it's not one of the 7 mitzvahs v'nayach. Right? What are the 7 mitzvahs v'nayach? Avodah zara, gilei haraya, shvichas damim, Ever Menachai, Berachas Hashem, Gezela, and Dinim.
Could fall under shvichas damim, it could fall under dinim. Shvichas damim, because you don't give him, you're going to kill him. He's going to die. And you're responsible for him. He's dying. Or you could say maybe through the malchus, through the din. A just system would be one in which, poor people who need, you get the rich would have to support them in some fashion through the law.
That's communism. Right?
That's a stretch.
But is it part of dinim? Maybe the din should be go and get a job. But let's
say that to the Haredim too.
But what about going?
Chas v'shalom, chas v'shalom.
What about going that save Jews?
What?
What about going that save Jews?
Goyim that save Jews?
Yes.
The fires will be very hot for them.
Hard to go get around.
So that's what we know. We want to know would are Goyim chayiv to give tzedakah?
Yeah.
So, good.
What about?
On the other hand, so on the first glance we would say it's not one of the 7 mitzvahs v'nayach. On the other hand, we have a pasuk in Yechezkel that says there's a pasuk in Yechezkel that says Zeh haya avoin Sedaim. This was the sin of Sedaim. Yaroni ve'evyain v'yachzika. Why was Sedaim destroyed? Because they didn't give tzedakah. Now we're in Sedaim. What were they? They were Yidden?
Jews.
Belzer, Hasidim, Satmar. What were they? Litfish. They were Goyim. So, how could Hashem say I'm going to punish them because they didn't give tzedakah? They're not mechuyev in tzedakah. Does that not mean that Goyim are chayiv in tzedakah? Look in the Ran, Masechta Sanhedrin, Daf Nun Vav. Goyim are chayiv in tzedakah. It's not one of the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach.
What was then you're punished?
Because the Goyim have to give tzedakah, but if you see a guy who's a murderer, you should not advise him to give tzedakah. Let him die without any zechut. That's his problem, he's not giving tzedakah. But you can't advise him. It's not one of the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach. So the Netziv, in his Hakdama to the Avas Chesed, he says a very interesting thing. He says, right, we know Olam Chesed Yibana, the world is built on kindness. And kindness is the tzura of a human being is to be compassionate to his friend. He says in the beginning of Bereshis, it says, V'atoisef laledes es achiv es hevel. What do the words es achiv add? No kidding me. Obviously, if Cain had a brother, so Rashi says es is the Rabbi's Tu'uma Yisera, right? So Netziv says es achiv teaches you that the birth of a human being is in the tzura of es achiv. That he has to have an achva, he has to have a relationship, he has to have a brotherlyhood to his fellow human beings. Interesting. It says in Netziv, Goyim are mechuyev in chesed. But in Sanhedrin it's not one of the Zayin mitzvahs b'nei Noach. It says in Netziv, what about the poskim that say Goyim are chayiv in pruruvu? Right? Tell it to the Chinese. But what about there are poskim that say women are chayiv in pruruvu, that Goyim are chayiv in pruruvu? It's not one of the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach. The Gemara says in Masechta Sanhedrin Daf Mem Ches, Kum va'asei lo chashiv. Those 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach are only counting the things they're not allowed to do, are not counting the things they have to do. So therefore, Goyim are chayiv in chesed. I'll bring you another thing Goyim are chayiv in. Moshe Feinstein has a tshuva. In Orach Chaim, Chelik Beis, Siman Chav Daled, are Goyim chayiv to daven?
They're chayiv to give praise to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for what he provides, no?
Where does it say that?
He's the creations of Kadosh Baruch Hu.
Says Rav Moshe, a guy be'ez tzara, he needs parnasa, or he has a chayla, he's mechuyev to daven. Says Rav Moshe, where does it say that? Guy has to have emunah. Says Rav Moshe, if you believe in God and you don't pray to Him and ask Him what you need, obviously you don't believe in Him. Because how else are you going to get it? So Rav Moshe says, Goyim are mechuyev midairaisa to pray be'ez tzara. So what we're saying according to the Tziv is Goyim are chayiv in the midah of tzedakah. Goyim are chayiv in tzedakah. What you want them to have Shachris Mincha Marav?
Well, no, you say that if they don't realize that God is.
In other words, if they have a specific need, then tzara means they have a need. But stam to be kaiveya, that a guy that wakes up, first he watches football and then he's mechuyev to daven, that far we're not gonna.
Foxhole boy.
Yeah, right. However, says Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, goyim are not mechuyev in the mitzvah of tzedakah. Goyim are examples of that. It's not one of the Zayim mitzvahs. In Sefer Yechezkel it says that Sodom was punished because Yaroni ve'evyon lo yachzika. How do we understand that? You know how we understand that? If really, you know why Sodom was destroyed? Because they were murderers, they were adulterers, they did every aver in the book. But if they would have given tzedakah, Hashem would have dealt with them lifnei mishur sadin. But because they didn't give tzedakah, so then they were held accountable for what? For all the Zayin mitzvahs that they violated. Okay. And so it's an interesting machlekes. Rabbi Chanan offers another interesting possibility, and that is that Rabbi Chanan wants to know, why is it, you look through the whole Torah, it doesn't say anything about midas tayvos. Why doesn't it say, don't get angry?
That's not a midah tov.
Al-Recha Kamoicha says that I should love you. But it doesn't say anywhere, don't get angry. It doesn't say anywhere, don't be a balgaiva. Doesn't say anywhere to develop good midas. Why isn't the mitzvah in the Torah have good midas? Says
You learn from the others.
If you observe,
Others exemplified all the qualities.
So isn't it strange that we have all these stories about the others and the Torah never says act like them?
but if you observe all the mitzvot,
That's why it's
then you're going to have good midos. One goes with, you can't have one without the other. A natural result of observing Kol Torah Kula is having good midos. You can't possibly observe the Kol Torah Kula in terms of lo yikalel, right? All of the things that relate to Ben Chavero, the Losa stage, and a lot to do. If you observe all of those, you in and of you innately have good midos.
So why wouldn't the Torah say to do it? So he brings Reb Chaim Vital. Reb Chaim Vital asks this question, and the Shari Kedusha. And Reb Chaim Vital says, imagine you hire someone to build a building, and say I want 4 stories. So the guy builds you a building. You come there, it's about to collapse. Why? He didn't make a foundation. You say, Shaita, why didn't you make the foundation? You never told me to. I don't have to tell you to. If you build a building, you have to have a foundation. So Chaim Vital says, if God is telling you to do these mitzvahs, the obvious foundation that everything has to be built upon is midas tayvos. So the same thing with Goyim. They have Zayin mitzvahs, but the foundation has to be a certain basic, good human character. So we can't say that a guy, every time an ani passes by, is mechuyev to give him $1, but he can't have the bad midah of achzarias. He can't be cruel. That's a flaw in his midas. So what Sodom was punished was because Yaroni ve'evyon lo yachzika, as a rule, ever. They never ever gave tzedakah. They had this character trait of achzarias. Okay. So that's a little bit on this pasuk Chav Daled over here. Lohin malka yishbar alach b'chatayach. So we continue. It all befell Nebuchadnezzar Malka. It all happened. He lost his sanity. He bathed. He was like a caveman. He was like a human werewolf. He bathed in the dew. He ate the grass. He went meshuggah. Now we're going to learn how this happened. How did this happen? You ready for the story? L'ktsas yarchin shveyasar, at the end of 12 months. Al heichal malchusa di bavel mahalachava. On the palace of the king, he was walking. Now, remember, Perek Daled was a letter that Nebuchadnezzar wrote, like an autobiographical letter about his story. And now, all of a sudden, Pasuk Chavav, it switches from the first person account to third person. Some of Farshim learn this is still a continuation of Nebuchadnezzar's letter, and it switches into third person, and others learn this is the Ruach HaKodesh speaking, telling us what happened. Okay. Anei Malka v'Yamar. The king spoke up and said, imagine he's walking on the roof of his palace, and he looks down and he sees the expanse of the Babylonian Empire, and he's on top of the world. And he says, Ana Malka v'Yamar. The king answered and he said, Hala dahi bava rabsa. Behold, is this not the great Babylonia? Diana v'naisa, that I built, leves malchu, for the house of my rulership, biskaf, with my might, chisni, with my strength, v'likar hadri, and for the honor of my majesty. In other words, he's saying, look what I built, look what I made, look who I am. I'm the man. He's gloating. While the word...
Didn't he just recently, in response to the first interpretation, tell Daniel, he gave praises to a Kadosh Baruch Hu, and he was recognizing then that everything is under Kadosh Baruch Hu's control. Now all of a sudden he forgot about what he said, and it's all because of him.
So do you remember what he said after that first dream? Look back in Perek Gimel, the last pasuk. He said, Asahi kama Ravravin. His signs, how great they are. V'simhohi kama sakifin. His wonders, how mighty they are. Malchuse malchus alam. His dominion is, his malchus is forever. V'shotane imdar v'dar. Apparently, even though God's malchus is alam, his shaltane is not alam. His shaltane is only once in this generation, once in that generation. There apparently is there's a difference, a nuance between malchus and shiltain. The malchus, Nebuchadnezzar recognized. The shiltain yet, it was not in full recognition. And what we're going to see...
He's like any other king whose fortunes go up and down.
What?
He's like any other king whose fortunes go up and down.
What we're going to see in Pasuk Lamed Aleph is that after this situation, Nebuchadnezzar is going to say, Shaltane, Shaltin Alam. The Shaltan is Alam. So apparently there was a deeper recognition of God's control. And as we're learning, that even though, remember, we learned, Nebuchadnezzar believed in God. It's just, he was incredulous about God's ability to tamper with human affairs. Okay. Fine. So let's continue. The matter was still in the king's mouth. Kolman Shemaya Nafal, a voice fell down from heaven. Lach Omrin Nebuchadnezzar Malka. To you we say, King Nebuchadnezzar, Malchusa Adas Minach. Your Malchus will be removed from you, Rashi says. Sarah Minach. Umin Anash Shalach Tardan. You will be banished from mankind. V'imchevas bara medarach. You will live with the wild animals. Izba, grass, kisayrin, like oxen, lach yita'amun. You will taste. V'shiva yidanin, and 7 periods, yachlefun alach, will pass over you. Ad di sinda, until you recognize, di shalit ilah, that the Supreme One rules, b'malchus anasha, over human affairs. Ulaman di yitzpei, and to the one who he... What does the word yitzpei mean?
Yes.
We said it's a lashon of tzivi. What does tzivi mean?
Loves.
To desire. The one who he desires, yitanina, God gives it to who he chooses. Ba'ashata, at that moment, milsa safas al Nebuchadnezzar. The matter, what does the word safas mean? Rashi says,
Left him.
Kosa alav, it befell him. Umin anasha trid, he was banished from man. He went crazy. You know, if they had the clinicals, the clinics back then, they would have diagnosed him as, you know.
Bipolar.
Exactly.
The second, the other side came out.
Schizophrenia, yeah.
Schizophrenia.
Yeah. Trid, min anasha trid. He was banished from man. The Izba Kisaron Yechol. he ate grass like an ox. Umital Shemaya, and from the dew of heaven, Gishmei Yitztaba. He bathed his Gishmei. What does Gishmei mean?
His body.
The rains.
His body.
Like Gashmias, his physicality, his body, Rashi said. Adi Sare, until the point that his hair, Kenishrin Rava, grew like eagles. Now, eagles don't have hair.
They have feathers.
So that's what it means.
Like the feathers.
Long hair.
Long hair,
like the long
feathers of the eagle.
Who has a longer wingspan, right, than an eagle? So he had long hair. The Tifroi Kitzipara, he had claws like an eagle.
They turned around. They went like this.
Okay. The Lexas Yoimaya, and at the end of days, in other words, at the end of the period, which Rashi learnt meant, what were the Zayani Danim? Rashi learnt 7 years. Others learned 7 seasons, right? At the end of these seasons, Ano Nebuchadnezzar, Aine Lishmaya Nitzles. I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven. Umandi, and my brains, my intelligence, Allah Yisur, was restored to me. Uli'ilah, Barches, and to the Supreme One, I blessed. Ulechai Alma, and to the life of the universe, Shabches, I praised, V'hadres, and I honored. Di Shaltane Shaltan Alam. His Shultan was forever. Umalchusa Yim Darvadar. And his Malchus.
That's the reverse.
Yeah.
What does it mean that the Malchus?
Okay, so what does this mean? Good question. Let's see what the Malbim says. The Malbim says...
Do we know, was he still actually the king during these 7 seasons or 7 years? When he was incapable of human thought?
I mean, did they make it a replacement?
Yeah, otherwise, I mean, if they got rid of him, then after these years, if he got his mind back, he could have been Eis Melech. Whoever was the king would have said, I don't need you to be my threat, I'm going to get rid of you. How would he have been able to function as a Melech under these circumstances?
Okay, interesting point. I don't know. So let's see, what does it mean? Di shaltane shaltan alam u'malchusayim dar v'dar. So the Malbim says, "V'zehela v'hoisef tehila al mashakasav mala." With this expression, he added praise to what he said above. Malchusay malchus alam v'shaltanim dar v'dar. Shikvar beyarnu shehamalchus. What's the difference between malchus and shultan? Malchus is hanhaga al pi chukei hateva astur m'sheishes me'brachus. God running the world through the laws of nature.
Well, Malchus is a kingdom and Shultan is a domination, no?
That's not how he's translating. He's saying Malchus refers to the working, the natural process, the natural workings of the world, which is forever. That Nebuchadnezzar recognized. God set into motion the natural process. The sun rises, the sun sets. There's gravity. That will continue forever. Mibli hishtanas, but v'shultanus is shidur hatava, is overriding the system. The ability to, step in and stop the machine. That's when he wants to. When God so desires, he'll step in and override the system. It has become now known to me. That not like I thought originally, that God set nature into motion and whatever He chooses, He changes it. No, shegam hanhaga satevu l'fi adar v'amaisim, ad shegam ateva mlei nisim nistarim, v'hanhaga ativis nimsheches l'fi azchus v'amaisim l'fi ateret atova tzasa. It's not that God just set the world into motion. Daily, God is always manipulating nature according to the individual, according to the people, according to their merits. It's not that God put nature into motion and then He overrides it when He so chooses. Just the opposite. Beautiful. He's saying, Shaltane Shaltan Alam. He's constantly overriding, changing the system, overriding the system. Umachusayim Darvadar. And once in a while He'll just allow things just to He'll be master panim sometimes in Darvadar. But the way the majority of the time it works is the Hanhaga Hanisis, which is a beautiful concept. that God is always overriding the system. That when a Jew does a mitzvah, God is always manipulating and overriding the system for schar and oynesh. That's what the Ramban says. The Ramban has a kasha. Why doesn't it talk about Olam Haba in the Torah? It doesn't say anything about the Gan Eden in the Torah. It doesn't talk about the world to come. So Ramban says the fact that you can get reward in Olam Haba, that's the davar pashat. Of course you can get reward in Olam Haba. But because I put on tefillin, my stocks are going to go up. Because I put on tefillin, I'm going to be healthier. Because I don't speak lashon hara, I'm going to do better in one of my endeavors. What is one thing? How does my tefillin affect the climate? How does what I talk? How does it affect my job? The answer is nisim nestarim. That's why the Torah is full of v'nasati gishmeichem beita. The Torah talks about your reward in this world, because that's a big chiddush. Because why would my actions affect the natural process? So that's what the Malbim is saying. Shaltanei shaltan olam. God always is overriding the system. Okay.
Tzadik Varala, Rosh Hashanah, that's God overriding the system too. It's not that we wouldn't think it's a normal Deras HaTeva, but Tzadik Varala or Rosh Hashanah. That's the Kadosh Baruch Hu's intervention too, to give him his reward here, so he has no zchusim when he comes upstairs.
Yes. Okay. Pasuk Lamed Beis v'chol dorei alma, and all the residents of the world, kelach hashivin. They're like nothing to God. Meaning he's showing his humility. Uchemitzbe'ei, and as his will is, aved, he acts b'chel shemaya. In the heavenly hosts, God does as He pleases up in heaven. V'darei ara, and to those who live down here. V'la itai, and there's no one with him. The yamache beidei, to push away his hand. Right? Hashem's not married. There's nobody saying, no, don't do that. Don't do that. Nobody turning the steering wheel. Nobody's saying, I think you should do things that, yeah. V'yemer lei ma'avan, there's no one to tell him what to do. Beizimna, at that time, Mandi Yusuf alai, my seicha was restored. V'likar malchusei hadri, and to the honor of my kingdom I was returned. V'likar malchus, to the honor of my kingdom, hadri, my glory, my
Hadri, I returned.
Let's see. Yeah, correct. Thank you. Hadri returned. V'zivi Yusuf alai, my appearance was restored. V'li, and to me, Hadavrai, my governors, V'rav Ravani, my officials, Yuvalim, they asked for me. They wanted me back. They wanted me to come back.
This answers the question. He wasn't really an active
In other words,
king.
he was institutionalized, but they didn't make a successor.
That's very strange.
Right?
Somebody didn't want to grab the power.
V'amalchusi haskanas. And I was established on my throne. Uravu yatira husafasli. I was given extra honor. Rashi says, Gedula yisera min harishona nitoisafasli. What? Listen to this. Chazal say, he would now, instead of ride on a horse, he would ride on a lion. V'kesher tanin beroishai. And he had like a serpent's knot on his head. So he was a fearsome guy. Okay. Last pasuk in the Perek, let's finish up. Ka'an. At that time, I praised, I uplifted, I honored the King of Heaven. All of his actions are true. Din, and his pathways are just. And the one, and the one who walks, begeva. What's geva?
Haughtiness.
With arrogance, with haughtiness. Yachel hashpala, God could lower. Just want to be ma'ir at one point that in the beginning, in Pasuk Lamed Aleph, it says, Umandi ala Yosef, my intelligence was returned. And again in Lamed Gimel, it says, Beizimna mandi Yosef, my intelligence was restored. So what does this mean? His mind came back twice.
What does it say? What's the question?
Where did his mind go?
Healing himself.
What's the question?
Where did his mind go? He left us once gone.
It says 2 times in Lamed Aleph and Lamed Gimel, his intelligence was restored.
Yeah, so.
In the beginning, he still wasn't the king.
So what's the question?
But do it twice.
Once the marbles are
Why
back.
does it say back again?
Yeah. You're saying it was a process.
according to here, it says here it signifies a complete return. As distinct
First he says it in general, and then he says it in
Also, one other point is, in Lamed Aleph, even before his intelligence restored, it says he lifted his eyes to heaven. To do what?
Right.
In recognition of God. So how did he recognize God before the intelligence was restored? So apparently, like you're saying, it was a gradual process. It wasn't that, he just snapped out of it right away. Yeah.
Meanwhile,
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.